Riddle me this. I can use creation tools that can allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phones and computers. I can distribute your podcast so it can be heard on all the major listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple Music. I can make you some money, no strings attached. I'm free as a bird. I'm something you raise on a ship besides a sail. Who am I? That is correct. Anchor, baby. For more information, visit anchor.fm today.
Greetings, fellow investigators. Special Agent Spooky Clutter here. Have you ever had a craving for a nice, refreshing energy drink, but you don't want the annoying sugar crash that comes with it? Well, you're not alone, and I've got a great alternative that's bound to get your attention. I'd like to introduce you to Raze Energy. Raze Energy is one of the best energy drinks on the market today. Unlike other main brand energy drinks, Raze has no sugar crashes and zero sugar. It's a great drink for getting that boost you need, whether you're going to the gym or conducting cinema investigations like myself and Special Agent Carter Sauce. So, if I got your attention with that, then do yourself a favor and go to repsports.com and try it out. When you get to checkout, use code C-Files for a great discount. And we here at the C-Files would like to thank Raze Energy and Repp Sports for sponsoring the podcast, as well as the Slash and Cast Podcast Network. With that all being said, enjoy today's episode, and until next time, my fellow investigators, remember, the entertainment is out there.
You're listening to the C-Files RetroAthon. In Season 1, they investigated some of the greatest horror and sci-fi that cinema has to offer. Now, they're taking you to the classics that started it all. From the mystical performance of Bela Lugosi in Dracula, to the terrifying analogy of the dangers of nuclear weapons in Godzilla. Join the special agents of the CBI in the C-Files RetroAthon. Brought to you by the Slash and Cast Podcast Network. Now, here are your hosts, Special Agents Spooky Clutter and Carter Sauce.
Greetings, fellow investigators. Welcome back to the C-Files RetroAthon. I'm Special Agent Spooky Clutter.
I'm Special Agent Carter Sauce.
And I'm Special Agent T-Con.
And today we are continuing our RetroAthon and reviewing King Kong from 1933. And wow, this film is classic in every sense of the word. It's also ironic that we're covering King Kong a couple days after the Godzilla vs. Kong trailer released. And I'm very excited for that movie too. So it's kind of nice that we're going back to where it all started with King Kong. And this movie pioneered so many different techniques and story things going forward for cinema. And I'm very excited to get into it.
My thoughts exactly. I would like to go back to 1933 and see this movie come out, and I would just like to be there just applauding the whole movie all the way through. And the fact that this movie is set and came out during the end of the Great Depression is actually very good, though, because if you remember 4 years ago, the stock market crash in 1929 was not only a big blow to the United States of America's economic stature, but also out of the darkness there came a small flame. And the flame happened to be the golden age of Hollywood. Thus, King Kong, Phantom of the Opera, The Mummy, stuff like that, the good stuff.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on there. The golden age of cinema started after the stock market crashed, and it's the whole thought pattern that you have to go through a lot of pain in order to get something good out of it, kind of like pregnancy. You go through all that pain, and then you have a child, and it's a very beautiful thing. It's a good thing. So as far as King Kong goes, the basic story is Carl Denham is a filmmaker, and he wants to go to this place called Skull Island to make a movie. And the reason he wanted to go to Skull Island in particular is because he had a friend of his that was a skipper on another boat, and he gave him this map to go to Skull Island. And there were a lot of rumors and mystery surrounding this island, and also concerning a certain creature, a god of the island. Of course, today we all know that god as King Kong, and Kong is king on the island. He has a huge mountain where he boasts his king status, and the whole idea is for Denham to get a shot of this creature. Of course, you could say that Denham gets more than he bargains for when they get to the island and they encounter the natives, and basically all hell breaks loose from there. So with this particular story that Karl Denham is trying to make, he needs to have a female lead. And this is where he meets Ann Darrow, played by Fay Wray. And she's a looker. I don't know about you guys, but she has this thing about her eyes. And I remember talking in our previous reviews where the characters got a lot of focus on their eyes. In this case, there isn't as much focus on the eyes for her in particular, but I just noticed that she has the really beautiful eyes and a really beautiful face, and she's pleasant to look at, and I can see why Kong was attracted to her once she was put up on that sacrificial altar. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. And I would like to say that she kind of looks like a bomber model. Like, you know, the pictures or the paintings of hot girls painting on bomber planes during World War II. She could pass off as a bomber model.
I got to say that I'm trying to understand, how is it that women were treated so brutal back in those days? I have to do some backdrop on that. I'm an old guy, but I kind of let the past go, I guess. But I like the idea that we got a filmmaker looking for a great woman to fill the spot. Although the woman in this film, you know, they make it look like she's came out of, you know, I don't want to say like she's dancing on a pole or anything, but at least he found her at a paper stand where a guy was selling papers and oranges. So I thought that was pretty, you know, interesting by, you know, Denham, the director. But he's putting all this stuff together, and he gets all this information from the Norwegian, you know, guy named Barker or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
But I got to tell you, man, you know, the backdrop of the story, we don't get a lot of, you know, like where, you know, Denham got all this information from. But, you know, the idea that you're getting this interest and the fascination that comes out of your mind with fantasy stories like this, that we are in for more than Skull Island.
You know, I have to say also that the scene where Karl Denham is on the street, he's trying to look for the leading lady, and he comes across what looks like a battered women's shelter in a way. It really gives like a grounded feeling to the film, where Karl Denham is on the streets of New York, and New York isn't always this glamorous town where all the good things happen. It gives off a sense of realism where you have people that are struggling. And Ann Darrow is the embodiment of that, because she's practically homeless. She tries to steal some food, and the guy, the merchant, catches her, and Denham pays the guy off with $1 so that, you know, he wouldn't call the cops on her. And when I remember what Carter said earlier about this is 4 years after the Depression, you could say that this scene is showing the results of what happened after coming out of the Great Depression, and that you still have a lot of poor people in the area of New York that are struggling to get food and shelter. So it's really brilliant to make that analogy.
Yeah, and when I said earlier about the Great Depression, is that early in the scene, though, where the director is giving her a proposition on being the lead role in his movie, she tells him that she actually used to be an actress at, I think it was like either like a playhouse or something, or a studio before it got shut down, which kind of either, I'm not sure if they went out of business or they weren't getting enough revenue, or if it was depression, don't know what though, but in the end she gets the job.
Right, and the adventure starts when they get onto the boat called the Venture. And I love the interaction between Jack Driscoll and Ann Darrow. But funny side note really quick, when we looked at the credits for this film, they call him by the name of John Driscoll. And that confused the living daylights out of me, because throughout the film we always hear him be referred to as Jack Driscoll, not John. But later on in the film, when they're in New York, Karl Denham addresses him as John Driscoll. And it's so confusing. So anyway, back to the boat. I like the interaction that John Driscoll, or Jack Driscoll, and Anne have. I always laugh at this because this is my third time watching this film, so when they start talking and Jack's like, oh yeah, it's bad luck to have a woman aboard, or, women are bad luck or a bother, it's like, oh, you're a bothersome having women on board. It's so weird, and it's kind of harsh to touch on what T-Con said. Women in the woman in this film was treated with a lot of harshness by Jack, but they ended up kind of making up, and it's like, oh yeah, I think I'm falling in love with you. They say that later on. It's like, wow, love is working pretty fast, isn't it?
Yeah, it's sort of like a Han Solo and Princess Leia type moment, though. Like, he's a scoundrel and she's a princess. He acts like a bad boy and she's a good girl, but she doesn't give a shit about, like, she's not the typical damsel in distress, though, moment like that. But then they sort of, somehow when they're together for a certain amount of time, they sort of develop like a relationship, and sometimes relationships could be built on bad moments, though, or like it's like a love-hate type moment, though. Like, I hate you for a minute and then I love you the next.
Well, it is true because, like I said earlier, having those difficult moments can really bring people together. The tragedy or the danger can unite people in a common cause. In this case, the common cause will be to survive.
Yeah, and the danger moment, if you really want to think about it, is the fact that back in those days, women are sort of looked upon in a different light, and I don't understand completely why. There's probably a lot of factors that aren't really necessary to get into, but you can see it as Jack Driscoll, who will become John later for some reason or another, how his interaction is with Anne. So Anne, I get confused on these names, man. We get Jack Driscoll, John Driscoll. So, Anne is, got her position, and she's assuming that position, and she's really accepting it in a way. She's sort of yielding to the man or the male figure, and that's what happened back in those days. So let's just get to the point that Denham's got a dream. He's got information, he's got a mission, he's got a map, and he's got a history of what's going on here. And he's going to Skull Island.
Yeah, it's a shady history, though, and he doesn't have too much information. He's only heard stories. He obviously has that map. And as we understood in the film, he says that no white man has seen the creature that is on that island. And I find that comment very hilarious, because my question is that how is that true? Because he said that he got the map from a Norwegian guy. And if he got the map from a Norwegian guy, the Norwegian guy is most likely white, which means he saw the island, he saw something on the island, and then you have to ask, okay, well, where do the stories come from? Because he asked the skipper on the boat if he's heard of Kong, and the skipper responds with, yeah, he heard it was like some kind of myth or something. So the word of Kong has been getting around, and I'm curious, okay, so if no white man, quote unquote, has ever seen Kong before, then how are all these stories going around? How did the Norwegian get the map? Did the Norwegian draw the map himself? Or, what? Or did the map come from Skull Island itself? But then if it did, who the hell drew the map? So it's kind of weird, but it's kind of a moot point in the end, because we get to the island regardless. And the first interaction that we get is, well, first they're hearing the drums from the island. And I got to say that the drum sound was pretty ominous coming from that boat. And the shot that we get where they're on top of the Venture on the boat, and we get the shot of the island, and you can see the giant wall and the giant mountain behind that wall. It's a beautiful shot.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful shot, and the ominous tone of hearing the beats of the drums, it's so ominous that you could hear it from the Venture, and you're hearing these boom 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 boom, stuff like that, and it's so eerie. Just moments like that, though, and we see this wall, and to my opinion, though, it looks like one of those giant, like those types of border walls, sort of like the Great Wall of China, but a smaller, like a scale model of it. And wow, I'm at a loss of words of how epic, or how, even by 1930 standards, this movie has practical effects in it, which I'm a fan of.
I mean, I play a lot of video games like Uncharted, Tomb Raider, and seeing these drawn back shots of the gate, the wall. We don't, if you go forward to 1976, which I'm going to touch on more and more throughout this review, that you didn't even get that until they landed on the actual beach and, trenched their way through, if you will, to the wall and heard the drum beating and everything. They're actually hearing that as they hit the shore in this film. Of course, this is the initial film. This is the groundbreaking moment of King Kong, and really, I'm really excited watching this film from beginning to end. The dialogue for those times was what it was. I have to accept it for what it is. It's an original, right? But getting back to the landing on the beach and everything, and hearing the drum beat, and everybody's coming ashore, and they're heading towards the drum beat, and with the information that they have regarding what's going on Skull Island, and they're there, they've landed, and here we go.
So when they get on the island, they see a performance, like a ritual or a dance going on, and using some deductive reasoning, you can tell that they're getting a woman prepared for some kind of a marriage ceremony or some kind of ceremony, because you have this young woman that's being dressed up with all these flowers, and it looks like a bit of a wedding ceremony. You have everybody dancing, chanting with the drums. So they're getting prepared for some kind of a ceremony. And for us that already know what's going to happen based on other films, we know that they're getting this woman prepared to get into a marriage with King Kong as a sacrifice to appease their god. But, as we see in the movie, the term sacrifice, we would think that the term sacrifice means that the woman's going to die. But when Ann Darrow gets taken by Kong, he doesn't kill her. So that's really curious. It is a technical sacrifice, but the sacrifice doesn't die. The sacrifice lives, and it's Kong, he's looking for a mate. But there's a bit of a problem. It's a size difference, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a bit of a size difference there, and once the crew are discovered by the natives, it's weird how they are not easily abducted or killed though, but somehow the chief of this tribe comes up and they talk to him, but luckily the captain speaks that native's tongue though, and then next thing you know, this weird guy comes up, and it's this witch doctor or voodoo priest, or as I like to call him, or practicer of the arts, which is actually weird though, because the guy that plays him, his name is actually Steve Clemente or Steve Clemento, and it turns out that he's not actually African American, he's actually Mexican, which is sort of not like doing blackface, but it's sort of interesting because this was in black and white, and he could totally pass off for a black person, and he's telling them that the ritual has been interrupted or it's ruined because you've witnessed it, and they said to make up for it, we'll take Anne instead, but they're not having none of that. So they said, okay, we'll think about it tomorrow though. And then next thing you know, come to the scene with the Overwatch, who happens to be the worst at his duty. You had one job and you're just dozing off and you're cleaning your pipe, not knowing that the obvious of that there is the tribe coming up and kidnapping your woman though. And because of that though, and before that happens, though, Anne and Jack decide to have a little cliche, touchy moment, like, oh, when I was brave with you, it's just stuff like that. They're just cliche romantic stuff. And next thing you know, yoink, abducted by the natives. And the funniest moment is that everyone is looking for her, and they're looking like Jack is looking for her in her dorm, in her cabin, as I would say. Next thing you know, the Asian guy who happens to be a cook comes up and he finds this lei, or a lei is a necklace in Hawaii. It's made out of flowers, and he says, all hands on deck, all hands on deck. And then everybody's like, what the hell's going on? We under attack or something? And then he says, crazy black man stole her, like crazy black man stole Anne.
He said crazy black man was on board, or crazy black man on board, and that's absolutely hilarious. I mean, it sounds wrong, but the amount of racial things in this movie, it makes me laugh because the idea that a Mexican guy was playing as like a black guy island native it's very unusual and interesting, because usually back in those days you'd have a lot of like blackface where you have white actors that have their skin darkened to play in those native roles. But to have a Mexican guy do it instead it's kind of like a twist on the usual suspects or the usual thing that you would expect. It's a subversion of expectations once again. And the thing is that these people, they look African American based on the afros and just the actual actors themselves. You can tell that they're African American, and to have one of them be a Mexican guy instead, it's different. But I like the interaction between the skipper and the witch doctor or the leader, where they said that, oh, we want the golden woman because Ann Darrow has blonde hair, and they don't usually see blonde-haired women, so it's something like a specialty to them. So, and they said, we'll give you 6 of our women for the gold woman, and that's weird. That's just I can understand in a simplicity of trade and bartering that you would give this golden woman who is worth 6 native women, but of course they don't go for it. And I mean, if you were in that situation, it's like, why would you give up your one woman for 6 other women, right? And I don't know what to say about it. It's just so weird.
Yeah, and it's weird though that once they found out that Anne was captured by the natives, though, they decided to go, okay, you know what? They kidnapped her. Time to arm up. So they go to the armory where they have a bunch of bolt-action rifles, Winchester rifles, and they go aboard. And it turns out that Anne is being used as a sacrifice by the natives, and so they sort of form up like a search party. Half of them like form up into 2 teams though, skeleton crew and the search party. So basically the search party goes in after Anne and Kong, and the weird thing is that we get to see the stop motion magic of, you know, Anne being taken away by Kong, and we get to see the interactions between the dinosaurs of a Stegosaurus and Plesiosaurus and another pterodactyl. We see a bunch of dinosaurs in Skull Island though, but it's weird though that Skull Island is actually like, think of it as like the time, think of it as like a prehistoric island that never got hit by the meteorite, and it's just like a land before time. Like everything is still there, and there's only a few animals, like prehistoric animals, that survived the meteor.
You know, it's funny because I can't remember if this was in the 76 Kong, or I forget if it was that movie or it was the 2005 Kong, but I heard this term that they labeled Skull Island as like the island that time forgot, because of having the dinosaurs on the island, having a massive gorilla, you know, roaming around. It's really interesting, especially for the story, because you might start considering to yourself, you know, well, what if this was actually real? What if there are islands or there are parts of land in real life where these dinosaurs from a bygone era still exist in their original form, and we just haven't seen them? I think that was one of the arguments for the Loch Ness Monster, that the Loch Ness Monster was an ancient dinosaur-like creature that was able to survive all these years later. And every time somebody sees them at Loch Ness in Scotland, that they're seeing an ancient dinosaur come up. So it's really interesting to see that. And speaking on Kong and the dinosaurs, the stop motion looks fantastic, especially when you put into the context that this is like the first time that they were doing this stuff. Everything that we're seeing, as we touched on in our previous reviews, you know, this is the modern way of cinema in its early times, in its infancy, if you will, where you didn't have a lot of stop motion back then, you didn't have a lot of sound in film, and all these techniques that they used were fantastic. And I would have loved to have been there to see this back in that time frame, because I'm sure that people in 1933 were shitting their pants when they saw King Kong on screen for the first time.
Yeah, I think that the term is breaking certain windows or walls, of breaking the 3rd or 4th window. what's it called?
Are you referring to breaking the fourth wall? I mean, that's like breaching. Like,
well, they were breaching sort of like the color scheme. They were breaching. What I'm saying is that you were getting black folks in film that you weren't getting before. You were getting the first time of animatronics. You were getting the first time where all these different things were coming into film, early film that weren't there.
right. Yeah.
So that's not compared to breaking certain walls.
Well,
or
I mean,
ceilings?
maybe breaking a norm, possibly. Like, I mean, well, it's not really breaking norms. It's just new techniques that were being developed.
No, it's breaking norms also because you're having more black people.
Well, yeah,
in
I
these
mean, yeah,
films
but I
when
mean,
at a time they weren't even invited in.
Yeah, but I'm speaking specifically to the use of animatronics, the use of stop motion. That's because I'm trying to figure out what you're trying to say.
That's the first film, right? When they're doing this.
I believe so.
I don't recall other films that where they're doing that, and especially women. Women breaking through like this, and of course, yeah, you had Ray in there, Fay Ray, right? Well, she wasn't the only woman in there. You had black women in there that were doing their filming also with the black natives, and that's something new because back in those days it just wasn't happening, and I'm glad to see that break through. Sadly, as time went along, it kind of diverted from that, but it did come back to it in filmmaking as time went along.
Right. Well, it's funny because in the movie you have Carl Denham that actually was seeking out a female lead in his picture, and based on everything that he recorded, she was the only thing that he was recording aside from the natives, and he specifically said a female lead, so she was in the lead role. It's not like she had like a co-star that was the male lead. Like in this particular picture that he was trying to film, she was the lead role. And you saw that in 1933. So very slowly you started to see more of those traditional modern things coming up where you have a female lead in a movie. Of course, it's like a movie within a movie, but Carl Denham never really finished that movie because instead of getting the film he wanted, he got something even better, that being Kong.
And I would like to clarify that breaking the fourth wall, that is not the correct way of breaking the fourth wall. The breaking the fourth wall is basically when the character in the movie just turns and looks at the camera and he says, "Oh, are you still here?" Yeah, sort of. That's something like Deadpool does, though. Think of something that Deadpool does. He breaks the fourth wall.
Basically, you're breaching realities in a way. It's where you have a fictitious scenario that acknowledges that it's a fictitious scenario.
My thoughts exactly. And so, unfortunately, let's just say that the director of this movie, well, not this movie, but trying to find Skull Island.
Carl Denham?
Yeah, Carl Denham. Yeah, thank you for correcting me on his name. Carl Denham brought Kong back from Skull Island, and they brought him to New York, though, and then he does this, like, grand opening speech like it's like this, like it's a big motion picture. They think it's a motion picture, but it's not. It's like proof of what I thought, though, because if you didn't have proof, though, then people will think you're crazy and you're a kook, though, or you're just a con artist. But he actually brought proof, but that proof came back to bite him in the ass, though. And unfortunately, but it was nice of him to mention the 12 people that lost their lives getting the specimen. Unfortunately, those 12, like, it's a shame that they didn't have like a memorial service after they got back to New York, though, but they couldn't do it because they didn't have the bodies. And I just think that it's a nice little touch up that he mentioned that he felt he gave his condolences to the 12 men that lost their lives trying to bring back Kong, though.
Yeah, at least Carl Denham had somewhat of a heart. He wasn't a completely heartless bastard, you know. He cared about what happened. Obviously, he was there to witness the terror that was on Skull Island with the different dinosaurs, the natives, and Kong himself. Of course, you know, you have to question, like, why in the world would you bring this big-ass gorilla into a very populated area with no proper safety precautions? Because all he had was chains, and those chains did not help because Kong got loose very quickly. Several people in New York were killed because Kong was essentially being an asshole. But of course, he was a wild animal. He didn't know what was really going on. He was just trying to defend himself, I guess, or trying to get out of this area that he's in, because this is a new land to him. He doesn't know what's going on. But they didn't portray Kong as sympathetic too much in the later half of this film. You know, the whole idea of Beauty and the Beast is that the Beast fell in love with Beauty, and as we see in future iterations of Kong, the Beauty starts to fall in love with the Beast a little bit. And that's where the sympathy comes in for the character, not only for the human female, but for Kong himself, where you care about what happens to Kong because all he wanted to do was just have a mate with this small human female. Of course, the proportions are completely off, and that might take you out of the movie, but if you think about the context of what they're trying to portray with Beauty and the Beast, then you can feel sympathy for Kong, especially when he gets killed, because all he wanted was to have a mate, and instead he gets taken off of his home and into a new land where they just parade him around like he's, some model, and nobody really cares about how the Beast feels. They just care about making the money, putting him up on the show, and making all that cash. It was really a selfish endeavor on Carl Denham's part. And it's unfortunate that Kong is the victim. Even though he was king on his island, he's nothing more than a mindless animal in the eyes of civilization.
Yeah, back in those days, I would have to say that the idea of, this mindless moment of not caring about, Kong himself kind of resonated too with the natives of the land too. Back in those days, we're in the early filmmaking process, okay? And it's not only those moments, but you can transfer that to what's going on actually in the environment. I was reading about the films prior to that, like 20 years prior to that, they were doing jungle-type movies where, this expectation of a group of people going into the jungle with a scientist and, sort of breaking in a lot of ways from scientific understanding of those days, right? Seeing the animals that we thought were extinct, and now they're brought into the scientific or sci-fi type environment. So
I would like to clarify earlier about Kong looking for a mate, though. But it's an interesting concept, though, because now that you think of it, there are some scenarios where it's there's a theory about interspecies romance type scenarios, like example, like The Little Mermaid, or a generic scenario where a Martian falls in love with a human girl, stuff like that, though. But the proportions are different, though. But it could go either way. It's just a work of fiction. And the big climax and the part of most iconic of cinema history is that King Kong is scaling the Empire State Building along with Anne. And the most coolest moment is then we see the police, which you should have done a few scenes ago, was to dispatch the U.S. AA Force, AAF, which is the United States Army Air Force, which was the Air Force at the time, before World Army Air Corps, before we were called the Air Force. And so they have these biplanes, and Kong's on top of the Empire State Building. He's banging his chest, and he's hanging off of it, and he's roaring. He's doing this thing. And then these 4 planes come up, and then they're trying to take him down. They're firing on him on Lewis guns, Browning machine guns. One plane gets killed. Well, one plane gets destroyed by Kong, though, because he just grabs it like it was nothing, just throws it down. And everyone, they're taking pot shots at him. It's a piece of cinema history, or another word for memorabilia. Everyone is like, the planes are taking shots at him. Kong feels like he's blood is pouring out of Kong, and he's knowing that, oh my God, I'm not a god, though. And it's kind of sad, though, that Kong is out of his element, though, because he's a king. Like they said though, King Kong was a god on his island. He ruled it with a fist, though. But where he's at, though, it's sort of like you're out of the jungle and you're going into the concrete jungle, which is different, though. And the saddest moment is when we see Kong, clenching his chest, and then he just falls off the Empire State Building. And then down below, we see police trying to push all the crowd back to keep them from seeing what's going on. And then the saddest moment is that Karl, he says, it wasn't the planes that killed him. It was beauty that killed the beast, which is very kind of sad, though.
Yeah, and throughout the film, we see Anne never connecting with Kong. And in the 1976 version, we see that. And I like to see that play out.
That's the problem I have with this movie. Overall, I really enjoy this movie, but the thing that throws me off is that Anne never starts warming up to Kong. Like, she doesn't loosen up and realize that he's trying to protect her. And you would think that after 3 encounters with different monsters or different dinosaurs on the island, that you would have realized that this creature isn't trying to hurt you. He's protecting you. If he wanted to kill you, he would have just ate you right after you got unhooked from the altar. So that really confuses me, because in later iterations of King Kong, the girl ends up falling for Kong, and she warms up to Kong, and Kong obviously warms up to her, and they have this bond, a really good bond. And then that's where the tragedy falls, when Kong is on top of the building and he realizes that he's dying, but yet he's still fighting. He's fighting to protect his lady love, and you have the girl crying because obviously it's a terrible thing. You have this innocent creature thrown out, taken out of his environment and placed into this new environment, and it's not his fault. It really isn't. Yet all these humans are just exploiting him, and he ends up getting killed anyway. And it was practically for nothing.
Yeah, it was all for nothing, though. And it's like, I'm going to reference the 2005 iteration. It's because Anne, or whatever her name is.
Yeah, it was Anne Darrow. Yeah,
Anne, she sort of developed this bond with Kong, though. And it's like, it sort of reminded me of Jane Goodall, who is a scientist who also studies gorillas. And it's sort of like, imagine if Jane Goodall was younger, and if one of these gorillas was like the size of a house, though, or a building. It's sort of like that, though. She could connect to them. It's just moments like that, though, that in this movie, it's like she's just scared of this big monster. But in later iterations, though, it feels like it's like in Beauty and the Beast, though, the one from '91, though. It's basically about Stockholm Syndrome, but then you sort of loosen up, like the captor loosens up, and so does the captee, and they sort of develop a bond, though. Basically Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. And I wish we would have seen a little bit more of Skull Island. I mean, we got quite a bit. We had the swamp scene. We had the scene with the T-Rex and the Stegosaurus. And this island really felt massive and magical and wild. And I'm really glad that we got those shots that we got, because it really harkened back to this kind of fantasy feel. And I mentioned that a little bit in our previous reviews of the film, or the other films that we've done, where you had certain scenes that were kind of hazy, and they gave off this fantasy appeal, and that once again returns for this film, and it fits perfectly. This film portrays Skull Island as this magical place where you have a lot of danger, and you have all the trees and the jungle, and it just looks really good.
Yeah, the haze, when the crew got on the boat to go through the river when they got off of the Venture, that haze that was displayed there was really a beautiful scene, and it's throughout. You get those moments like when you get to Kong's lair, which we didn't see in the 1976 version. I wish in the 1976 version they would have taken some of those elements from 1933 and incorporated. Of course, there's things in 1976 due to technology I wish they would have incorporated in the previous movie. So just those moments. And again, I have to mention the lair of King Kong in 1933. I just was really enthralled with it. Absolutely. It was beautiful.
Right. So as we begin to wrap things up here, what is something that you guys liked about the film, or what captivated your attention the most?
Well, I can say that gorillas plus sexy women in peril equals a lot of money to be made.
I would like to say what captured my my interest is that it's a story about adventure, romance, and of course mystery. You're going to an uncharted to an island that doesn't appear on any map, though. But then you see this mysterious beast, and it's like, oh my gosh. And it's a very interesting idea, though. Like it's not your average adventure type movie. Where it's all punching, shooting, explosions type stuff. But there are some elements in there where it just feels like it's not like your typical movie, though. It's like you get an action movie, you get an adventure movie, and you get a romance. All three genres all thrown into one, though.
A multi-genre blended film.
Thank you. Exactly.
I don't like the idea that Jack Driscoll and Anne really, I mean, there was a love interest there, but it wasn't intimate like with Lloyd Bridges and who played...
You're talking about Jeff Bridges and Jessica Lange in 76?
Jessica Lange. Yeah, I see that love interest there that was established on the island, on the boat, and was brought back to New York. We didn't see that in this film. I think there's a lot of focus on taking Anne, the character in the 1933 version, putting her in a position where she was the girl in distress. She
the
needed
damsel
help.
in distress.
Right, the damsel in distress. That's exactly what was going on in my mind with the film. Again, reverting back to what we were talking about before, it would have been a great opportunity as things went towards the end that she would have had some affection for Kong because he was doing it for her.
Yeah, I agree. The thing about the movie is that this iteration of Kong was much more like an action adventure film. It wasn't too heavy on the romance and the sympathy, and it wasn't very high on the scares either. I mean, and there were some quote-unquote scary moments, but the 76 King Kong film, which we will cover later on in the RetroAthon, gave a more scary version of Kong, where there was more ominous music, and just the shots of Kong in that film were really captivating. And I'm not saying it wasn't captivating in this film, it's just for the 76 film, they made Kong scarier in that film. This film portrayed Kong as more like less scary, more action orientated, and that's what I really felt for this movie throughout. When they got to the island, is that it was much more of an action film. There wasn't too much scares. There wasn't too much suspense. However, I will acknowledge that before they got to the island, there was a lot of buildup for Kong. When they were on the boat and Denham was describing about the map and the myth about Kong, it was a good build.
Right, and they did that build up in 76 also. And I see again in 1976 they took the 1933 film and they parroted a lot of scenes, not to a T, but the general format going forward seemed to be ditto.
I also find it funny that it was airplanes that eventually brought Kong down. I say that's funny because in Godzilla vs. Kong or even Kong Skull Island, we see that general bullets, like standard bullets and helicopters, don't even really phase Kong. It's like he's like a tank. He's like the Incredible Hulk, and he's essentially bulletproof in these films. And it shows where the evolution of Kong, really, going from 33 onward, where you have Kong that is susceptible to bullets, but then when he faces off against Godzilla, for example, bullets don't phase him, and he's able to go toe-to-toe with one of the most legendary monsters in cinema, that being Godzilla. So it's going to be very interesting to see Kong's evolution, not only in this RetroAthon, but when we review Godzilla vs. Kong when it comes out. We're going to see how Kong has evolved from a god that gets dethroned to back to a god in some ways, because he's a lot more menacing in future films and a lot stronger. So I'm very excited for that going forward.
My thoughts exactly. And I was curious though. I wonder who got the inspiration of Godzilla. I wonder if one of the directors or the writers actually saw an adaptation of King Kong playing in theaters, and they were like, I got an idea. Like the horrors, like add the idea of this dinosaur that was affected by the horrors of nuclear radiation and turn him into a beast. And then later on, it would sort of snowball into this big idea of this beast. Think of us like a big old like the biggest like crossover events though. Imagine like a big crossover event though, like before crossovers were a thing.
Well, I will say this as my final say on this film. This film gave us the genre of a giant monster attacking a city. Kong doesn't do too much damage to the city in this film. He does destroy the railroad and a train, and he does kill a few people. but this is a early infancy stage of the giant monster attacking the city cliche or trope or story plot. So, but it is still very nice to see where we started and where we are going forward.
Right, and you don't get those emotions from what you just said until later on in filmmaking when these films are remade again. We didn't talk a lot about King Kong 2005. I love Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson's a great director. Lord of the Rings. Everything is emotional. And I have to mention just real quick that King Kong 2005, to me, was emotional. I'm an emotional kind of guy, and I even teared up when Kong was being killed. And seeing the girl that played Anne in 2005.
Naomi Watts.
Yeah, Naomi Watts. She did a good job. And so, we can see the transition from just the big bag monster and humanity's in distress, and we see, emotional connections, to these creatures as time goes along. And I'm just excited about that. And I'm looking forward to talking about 2005 King Kong also at some point, too, as we progress forward.
I will say that they try their best in this film to humanize King Kong, and when I say that, I mean to make him more sympathetic, that he's not just that giant monster that's trying to destroy the city and eat people. He's a sympathetic character. He's an actual character that is multi-layered and has complexity. It's not just a dumb animal.
Right, yeah. I mean, he's being taken out of an environment that he's never been taken out of. He's interacting with creatures, what we call human beings, for the film that, he's very unfamiliar with. And so we see that, come to a, pinnacle, if you will, where the emotion of an animal and human beings come together, just like human beings with dogs and kitty cats and other things that are just a beautiful thing.
So as a final rating on the film, I'd say I give this film a 9.5 out of 10. I think that this movie is really good, and it's not just good for what it started, but it's a good film overall. Aside from all the quote-unquote cheesy moments, this film gives us a really good monster, some really good human characters, a lot of sympathy. Even though the emotion isn't really high, but you can still sympathize with Kong. And the special effects and the music are fantastic. They all go really well together. And I would have loved to see this movie in 1933 because they really presented this movie as a huge spectacle. The music really amps that up. So 9.5 out of 10 for me.
I would like to give it an 8 out of 10. Now, the reason why I say 8 out of 10, though, is because back in the days, everything was practical. I mean, like stop motion, and not to mention that this was in infancy. Like the film, like the movie industry was coming out of infancy, with talking pictures and stop motions and sounds and music, like stuff like that, though. But it had a good story. Like there was a good story in there, and there was a good plot. It's something easy you could follow. It's so easy that even a caveman could follow the plot, though. But in all honesty, there's like barely even, like I like how like a fraction of the movie of the characters that either get taken by either Kong or these monsters, or they fall to their deaths, are just basically clay stop motion puppets, though. But you could barely see the faces in them. But it's a good movie. It's a good popcorn flick.
I give it a 10 due to the fact that we're coming out of film making that there was no sound at all. Even before the sound, things were being done on stage. So this is the premiere. This is 1933. This is a new world in the United States of America in filmmaking that would spread across the planet. And so King Kong is a 10 out of 10 on so many levels. So many levels. The filming, the acting, it's more, to me, it's more than popcorn eating. It's something that would transcend anything that we could ever understand regarding these creatures being put on film in the magnitude that they are today, and we are enjoying them nearly 100 years on.
Well, that will conclude our episode on reviewing King Kong 1933. Thank you very much for tuning in. This cinema retroathon that we're doing is really great. It's really educational, seeing the early stages of film and stop motion, all these different effects that have pioneered the movie industry going forward. It's a tremendous honor to be able to go back to these films and marvel in their excellence and everything that they done and what they pioneered for cinema going forward. It's amazing. So with that all being said, thank you guys very much for listening. And until next time, my fellow investigators, remember,
the entertainment is out there.